Soundstripe.
Welcome to chapter 4. This is actually my second time filming because of certain events had caused me to lose the footage because I procrastinated on getting it onto my computer and editing. Not only this chapter, but also chapter 5, which is really annoying, but it just means that I can vocalize my opinions a little better and see what I do differently this time. And we're opening chapter 4 with Jane and Elizabeth being alone. And previously, Jane had been cautious about sharing her praise to Mr. Bingley around her family, but with Lizzie, she is now expressing how much she admired him. He is just what a young man ought to be, she said. Sensible, good humored, lively, and I never saw such happy manners, so much ease, with such perfect good breeding. He is also handsome, replied Elizabeth, which a young man ought likewise to be, if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete. And the reason why I want to bring this up is that Jane Austen, in my belief, is very subtly poking fun at this concept of meeting your future husband at a dance. Because how well do you actually know this person? While Jane had shared two dances, and we don't know the style of the sets, so it could be two actual dances or four, depending, or however many, but still, while you're dancing, you don't really get to converse much because unless they're doing a waltz where it's more one on one, which they're most likely not doing at a country dance, you're moving and weaving, and we've seen the period dramas, so you're not really holding that much of a conversation. And we don't get a sense in the book that they've actually talked within a private group like we see in the 2005 movie. And even then, how much of a sense are you really going to get of a person's character in public? Because we have to remember Mr. Wickham was created for a reason. It's not only to foil Mr. Darcy, but it's to foil Bingley too. Because both Bingley and Wickham present themselves extremely well. It's just that they got lucky that Bingley genuinely is a good and kind person, and Mr. Wickham is not. And Mr. Darcy and Bingley are supposed to foil each other because one presents himself extremely well and has a very good first impression, while the other one does not have a good first impression, but he is actually a really good person. And I think, like I said, I think Jane Austen is poking at this concept of you meeting your future husband because let's remember this is also a wish fulfillment kind of story more so than any of her others. And Jane Austen's trying to fit within this box to get her story out to the public. So she has that concept of like Mr. Bingley does generally turn out to be a really good, kind person, which is very like Lord Orville in Evelina by Frances Burney. But it's also interesting. I don't know if I said this previously or if I said this in one of my previous recordings of this chapter or the next chapter that Jane would have actually probably have been the main character and someone else if anyone else had written the story. She is beautiful and kind and has every virtue that is supposed to be the leading lady in the story at that time. Lizzie, while does have very good characteristics, has a lot more flaws than some of the other characters like Pamela or Evelina would have had of that time. And so it's funny that Jane isn't, but Jane is obviously a big part of the story, and Jane obviously gets a good happy ending because she is very kind and virtuous. But yeah, it's funny that Jane Austen didn't have Jane being the main character because she would have if it was written by, Frances Burney or Samuel Richardson. But also that obviously, like I said, is poking fun at this concept of meeting your husband at a dance because it's like, how well do you actually know this person? So Lizzie makes this comment to Jane where she says, but that is one great difference between us. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me never. And I'm bringing this up because it's a perfect example of foiling. Jane Austen, especially in this book, uses comparison contrast a lot. She has a lot of characters being foils of one another where they're very similar. They have similar upbringing, like Jane and Lizzie, but yet their views on the world and how they interact with it is slightly different. Same with Darcy and Wickham, or Wickham and Bingley and Darcy, and you know, Lydia and others. Like, there's so many other examples that are going to be popping up. Like, even Lizzie and Charlotte. Like, there's just contrasting characters. Like, they're similar, but then they have very different views of life, even though they go through similar experiences. But yet, at the same time, we're going to see with nearly every single one of these characters has one similarity, which is their pride being affected at some point or another in the story. And then we see how this particular character reacts to their pride being affected. And to reiterate what I previously said, how Jane probably would have been the main character if anyone else had written it, we see it with Lizzie describing how Jane, you're a great great deal too apt to know to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. All the world are good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life. And that is very similar to Pamela and Evelina. Like I had said, they are perfect. They are perfect, virtuous young ladies, and they go through every situation and they expect the best. And obviously, they're gonna, because they hold to their goodness and their virtues, they are rewarded at the end. That is the style of story we see at this time in history. There's a part of the conversation between Jane and Lizzie that not only foreshadows what's to come, but it perfectly states the theme of the story and the message and the conflict. With Jane saying, I would wish not to be hasty in censuring anyone, but I always speak what I think. And Lizzie responds with, I know you do, and it is that which makes the wonder, with your good sense to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affection of candor is common enough, one meets it everywhere, but to be candid without ostentation or design, to take the good of everybody's character and make it still better and say nothing of the bad belongs to you alone. And with Jane's comment of pretty much that I don't want to be hasty in censuring anyone is kind of what Lizzie has already done. Based off one interaction with Mr. Darcy, she has already formed a very strong prejudice and has tainted the water with the rest of the neighborhood. Now, it is Mr. Darcy's actions that makes it very easy to taint the water, but she's already formed a very solid opinion that will affect the trajectory of the story. And Jane's saying, like, I'm not going to be hasty. I'm not going to form a opinion based off first impression. Like, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But Lizzie then says that she is honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. And that is also slightly ironic because Lizzie is blind to the follies of Mr. Wickham until it's kind of forced in front of her, for her to confront that. And we see that in so many occasions, how quickly we form opinion and how that can cause to follies. But equally, you can think too good of someone, like Jane thinks too good of Wickham, and that prolongs her interaction with him, which then sets up the potential of Lydia in that whole situation. And Jane and Lizzie both wonder later, should they have said something sooner? Would that have prevented the interaction with him and Lydia? So I like in chapter 4, we're already getting stated the theme of the story and what's to happen with the story, but it's done so subtly that you don't really realize. But you do see that we're also being kind of preached to on morality and stuff like that. But that is also very common of stories at this time. That is the one way that they were going to get stories in young ladies' hands, was to have some form of morality. I just think that Jane does it much more subtle than like Samuel Richardson. We then get Lizzie's impression of the Bingley sisters, and I'm so disappointed always in the adaptations because their characters are always faded or dwindle down to just being the antagonist and like a pick-me kind of girl. But I find them absolutely fascinating because there's so much depth to each of these characters. But before I go into why I think they're fascinating, let's hear what Lizzie says. So Lizzie thinks after interacting with them at the first dance, she says their behavior at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temper than her sister, and with a judgment too unassailed by any attention to herself, she was very little disposed to approve them. They were in fact very fine ladies, not deficient in good humor when they were pleased, nor in the power of being agreeable when they choose it, but proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, had a fortune of £20,000, were in the habit of spending more than they ought, and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore in every respect entitled to think well of themselves and meanly of others. They were of a respectable family in the north of England, a circumstance more deeply impressed on their memories than their brother's fortune, and their own had been acquired by trade. That tells us enough about their characters and their personalities and their backstory. I love, like, it's just that one paragraph and it tells us everything we need to know about the Bingley sisters, and that they're pretty much new money and rank in society means a lot to them. That's why the one sister married a man of fashion, because that would elevate them in society. He would open the doors for more people for them to interact with, and that is also why Caroline Bingley is aiming for Mr. Darcy, because of his family history and status. While they don't have a title, it still would mean a lot. It's still a step above where they were. And so they're kind of new money. And because of that, they don't feel safe within it. They don't have the history, the depth, and they kind of step on others. So I also like their personalities is very much a facade. They're very much they'll be pleasing if it pleases them and if it helps benefit them, but if it doesn't benefit them, then why would they care? And I think in part why the two sisters are kind to Jane is that they don't really see her as a threat to them. Like, she's not of a higher status than they are, or more refined, or has better social group than they do, so she's not threatening. However, when her and her brother start to seem like they are going to possibly be a pair, that's not good enough for the Bingley sisters. They want their brother to have an advantageous marriage because then it would be advantageous for them. It would elevate their society and solidify their place within the society because it's so brand new. And so, again, their family is foiling Mr. Darcy's, who has the history of being that, like, title and wealth. Like, they have a wealth. You see it with a portraiture hall when Lizzie goes there. Like, they have a history. And it makes me think of a Georgette Harris story because it always does. But I just finished reading Sylvester or the Wicked Uncle, and Sylvester is a duke, and like, he might come across as proud, but he has a history weighing on his shoulders, and he does speak kindly to his those beneath him. Like, they respect him, but he could be kinder, and that's what the FMC kind of pushes towards. But he is forwarded against another character who is kind of new to money, and he likes to flaunt it with his outfits, and he likes to wave his money around, being like, why aren't you listening to me? I should be able to get the best bedroom because I have this money. And that is kind of what the Bingley sisters are like. They expect a certain deference because of their money, but they don't earn it. I also love the hypocrisy of Lizzie, that she notes here that the two sisters are proud, but she doesn't hate them in a way that she hates Mr. Darcy. And she even acknowledges that, like, the sisters didn't really acknowledge her. Neither did Mr. Darcy, but yet she hates Mr. Darcy because for some reason her pride was more wounded with him than with them. We then learn that Mr. Bingley's father had planned on buying an estate but never got a chance to with his newfound money before he died, and Charles plans on doing it too, but he's in no hurry. And I don't know if I said it in this chapter and I got deleted if I said it in the previous chapter, but we learn that he is 2 years past the age of majority, which I believe it's either 21 or 25. I'm going to say probably 25, so he's probably 27, and this is why he defers to Mr. Darcy's opinion a lot, because he's still young, he's still learning, he's trust in someone slightly older in the ways of the world, especially because the society that they're now existing in is still fairly new. He didn't grow up in this kind of society and history and, was it etiquette, kind of things like that. So also, this, he's still fairly new to having complete control over his money. There would have been a guardian kind of in place to help curb his spending, to make sure he didn't flaunt, waste it away as young men of money would do at that time. And for him, he's in no hurry, but his sisters are, because having an estate then would solidify their place. Having an estate means you have history. And that's like, Darcy's of the Pembrokeshire. Like, not only do they have a wealth of history if you look at the portraitures, but they also have power and influence because they have control over other people's lives. They're, the leaders, the pillars of their community. Think of also Emma and Jane Austen's Emma. This they do not have. And I think that is why they're so hot and cold with the Bennet sisters, because the Bennet sisters family technically has a slight leg up on them. While they don't have the wealth, they technically have a historical land, and the Bingleys don't. So yeah, this is like a very interesting dynamic you're seeing between multiple characters, and we're seeing this people on different levels of the social ladder, even though it's not a huge difference in the overall scheme. Like, they're not completely different, but there's slight differences, and those slight differences mean a lot to certain people in this story. We also learn a little bit about Darcy and Bingley's relationship, that between him and Darcy there was a very steady friendship in spite of a great opposition of character. Bingley was endeared to Darcy by the easiness, openness, ducality of his temper, though no disposition could offer a greater contrast to his own, and though with his own he never appeared dissatisfied. On the strength of Darcy's regard, Bingley had the firmest reliance, and of his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding Darcy was the superior, Bingley was by no means deficient, but Darcy was clever. He was at the same time haughty, reserved, and fastidious, and his manners, though well-bred, were not inviting. In that respect his friend had greatly the advantage. Bingley was sure of being liked wherever he appeared. Darcy was continually given offence. And one, I like that the relationship foils, I think, Lizzie and Jane's, because that is very similar dynamic we see with Lizzie and Jane. That Lizzie is, I believe, deemed to be the slightly more cunning of the two, but she does give some offense because she has a speaker mind, and Jane is much more happy and easygoing, more likely to be liked, and it's the same with Bingley and Darcy. We also see that like Darcy is slightly older and given deference, but not only because of his age, but because again, like I said, his status and his history of his status, that he has solidly had a place in this particular form of society. He has grown up in it. He knows the rules and etiquette, and Bingley is looking to him for education. And the reason why Darcy likes him, I think, is in part it's like having a puppy. He's just sweet, and you're like, he's kind, and he does, I think, like and want to tutelage him. And again, thinking back to the Georgette Harris story that I just read with Sylvester, the Wicked Uncle, Sylvester really likes our female main character and also her childhood friend Tom, who's much younger. While Tom does give him deference, it's not in a very like I don't know, like fangirl way, but like he still pushes back on him, which I think Sylvester likes, but also likes the deference because that is kind of nice for your ego boost for someone with that kind of power. But also, it's kind of nice to help someone else. And I think that is what happens with Sylvester, and that's what's happening with Darcy, is that it's kind of nice to help someone in society that you genuinely want to see succeed. And that is kind of what it's like a younger brother. I think he sees Bingley like a younger brother, and that is kind of like the relationship here. But that is going to lead to obviously conflicts down the line. Now, at the end of the chapter, we learn that Bingley was very much pleased with the society at the assembly, while Darcy was not. But we have to remember that Darcy grew up being taught the importance of his title, his land, his history, and his place within society. He's probably associated predominantly equals within his society. So coming to Meryton, it is very backwater. It is very small town. It may not seem like it to Mrs. Bennet, but it is small town compared to what they probably associate with. And on first impression, Darcy believes it's not worth his time. It's not his society. It's not the kind of people that he associates with. It's not going to help him. And it is a wrong impression, but I think it's a part of like being kind of secluded within one group that he doesn't realize the importance of others, those beneath him. Besides like those beneath him were those like subservient, like his tenants. So he respected his tenants, but he didn't respect them on the same level as say someone that is his equal. And I think Lizzie in his experience and relationship is going to push him to acknowledge others outside of his inner circle. So there's a lot that is starting to be introduced here in this chapter.
Soundstripe.